Hello and welcome to the Oxygenaddict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you perform at your best. With 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OXYGEN24 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby. And every week, I bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you for your triathlon goals for this season. Listen, a couple of things you could do for us before we get started. If you enjoyed this episode today, please consider following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please click like and subscribe. It really helps the growth of the show more than you can imagine. Secondly, if you're looking for help and advice with your training, please get in touch. You can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com or there's a link in the show notes. All right, everybody, on this week's show, we're bringing you a special episode of Ask Coach. We've got a whole bunch of questions I've been sent through via Instagram, via email, via instant messenger. So thank you for those people who've sent them through. I'm apologizing ahead of time that I can't reply to all of these individually on the platform we sent them through on, but hopefully answering them here on the podcast can really help people out with some real world questions. So we've got a mix of things people have sent in and questions that coached team athletes have sent through to me during the week. Again, that I really think are common questions can help other athletes out in their preparation going forward into the season this year. So first up, let's jump right into it. First question was one of the athletes we coach who says, my bike shoes are wiggling on my cleats. How do I stop it? This athlete included a video of a shoe clipped into a Garmin power pedal, and the shoe moved from side to side as the athlete moved the shoe. And the first thing to say is this is a great question because when you've been riding for years, you know the answer to this and it's really obvious. But as a beginner, you don't know this. A lot of the clip-in shoe manufacturers are made with varying amounts of float in the shoe. And what that means is that the shoe isn't fixed onto the pedal. It's designed so that the cleat has got a little bit of movement from side to side, from left to right. The different color of the cleat underneath the shoe can mean there's different amounts of float. So a red cleat underneath the shoe has got the maximum amount of float, and then a gray cleat has got a bit less float than that. And they even make some of the cleats that have got no float whatsoever. And the float allows your shoe to move side to side in the horizontal plane. And it's designed, it's not a flaw. That's the first thing. As a beginner, I think it's easy to look at this and think it's a problem. You know, my shoe shouldn't be sliding from side to side. The reason it's designed that way is to take pressure off your ankles, off your Achilles tendons, off your knees. And they found that adding this amount of float into the pedal really stopped a lot of athletes developing these problems. So when they were first introduced back in sort of the mid-80s, the late 80s, when athletes first moved over to them, long-time students of the sport will remember there was a fantastic Irish cyclist called Stephen Roche who won the Tour de France. And he was sidelined the season after he won the Tour de France. I think he won it in 87 from memory. Couldn't ride in 88 because of knee problems. And long story short, they attributed his knee problems to the fact he changed shoes and changed pedals when he moved teams. And the knee problems were all caused by his foot being completely fixed in place on top of the pedal without any ability to move from side to side. So that's why the manufacturers started building this float into the pedals. So there's absolutely nothing to worry about there. It is in there by design. It can feel a little bit strange at first, and I can understand why you would expect that the shoe would be completely fixed there, because after all, if you're used to a snowboard or a ski binding, your shoe is completely fixed, dead straight and flat and fixed into the item that you clipped into. But it's built in like that by design. To extend this story a little bit more, for athletes who come to me who are suffering from Achilles problems, Achilles pain, Achilles tendonitis, sometimes they get really, really bad Achilles problems. And it usually shows up when they're running. It's usually running that really hurts it, running that causes it to be painful after the sport. And often cycling is okay. One thing, a tip, it's not my knowledge, this was given to me by a physiotherapist, but the problem is sometimes caused by the bike cleats themselves being worn and the foot rocking from side to side in a different plane. So this isn't what we were talking about with the float, with the foot sliding side to side. This is the foot rocking on the pedal because the cleat has become worn. If you can imagine, the cleat has got a flat sole on it. Typically, this is caused because people walk around in the bike shoes when they stop, they get on and off the bike, they go to a cafe, they walk into the house or into the garage after the ride. The wearing away of the cleats can mean that that cleat will rock from side to side very slightly, and it puts a lot of pressure and a lot of twisting force on the Achilles tendon. And often that shows up actually when an athlete is running or post run, and it can end up being incredibly sore and debilitating in some cases. I suffered with this for years, and it was the physio saying to me, bring your bike shoes in and let's have a look at them. And I replied to him, well, look, it isn't a bike shoe problem. This is entirely a problem that happens when I run. But sure enough, my cleats on my bike were really worn, and that's what had caused the problem in the first place. Didn't ever hurt at all when I was cycling, but it looks like it was cycling that caused the problem. So there's a little tip for you guys there. It's well worth changing the cleats on your bike shoes. I advise my athletes to change them 6 months as an absolute maximum. So before they start to look worn and tatty and knackered, change those cleats. It'll cost you, I don't know, £10, £15 maximum for a new set of cleats. It's a tiny expense though, compared to the cost of a series of, seeing the physiotherapist for 10 weeks in a row and having treatment, and it'll save you an awful lot of pain as well. Okay, so hopefully that's helped to clear that one up. Next question. How do I best build bike power on the bike for Ironman Wales? Now, this is specifically from an athlete who's new to the team, has just joined, and is part of the team that's going to be doing. We've got a whole load of athletes who've joined us to do Ironman Wales this year based on some of the, we did some webinars to help athletes work out how to build training plans for themselves for Ironman Wales. And we've had a whole bunch of new athletes join us for Ironman Wales off the back of that. And so it is a very real and very common question that I had with almost everyone I spoke to who joined us, who's doing Ironman Wales, is I am terrified of the bike course Ironman Wales. I know it's very hilly. I know it's a difficult bike course. I know it's going to take me a lot longer than comparable, Ironmans where the bike course is a lot flatter. And I know that getting fit on the bike and getting in good shape is absolutely essential. And even in some cases, athletes have joined us who tried to do Ironman Wales last year or the year before and missed the cutoff on the bike. And so they're absolutely sure this is the limiter that's going to stop them doing the thing that they've dreamed of, crossing that magical finish line, because they didn't get to finish the bike leg. And so, rightly so, athletes are completely focused on the best way to build power for the Ironman Wales bike leg. And so I'll talk you through what my plan is as a coach working with these athletes. And then if you're in a similar situation, here's how you can structure your training as well going forwards. So firstly, we need to break your training year up into 2 parts. The second part of your training year is going to be entirely focused on extending your endurance and increasing your ability to progressively ride for longer and longer distances so that you're capable of riding 180 hilly kilometers come race day at Ironman Wales or whichever Ironman you're doing. That's going to be the second part of your training plan, and that's the nearest point to your race. Therefore, it stands to reason that if you're going to make yourself a stronger and more powerful bike rider and have more power to be able to push up the hills and to ride your bike faster, in simple terms, you're going to have to do that hard work further out away from the race distance. And so we need to do a block of training entirely focused on increasing your bike power, and then a block of training entirely focused on extending your endurance. So it's this block of building your bike power that's going to be the key. We're going to make the bike engine much, much bigger before we then start to add on the ability to go further on your bike. It's very hard to do these two things at the same time, in my experience. And athletes fall between the sticks a little bit here. And typically with non-coached athletes, this is where the big challenge for them comes in. I spoke to someone just the other day who said, I know that I need to get better on the bike. So what I've done is I've joined a local bike group. All the riders are faster than me. So I go out with them on a Sunday and I just try and hang on as much as I possibly can. And, I'm absolutely beasted at the end of these rides. I get to the end of it and I'm exhausted, but I've held on. And I just hope that this is going to make me a better bike rider by the time Ironman Wales race duration comes along. And then that's a really common story that I've got. But the problem is an athlete's trying to increase their endurance and increase the bike power at the same time and getting to the point where their endurance rides are going too hard for them to be specific for what we need them to be for endurance, which is developing fuel economy. But they're not going hard enough on these rides in order to increase the size of their bike engine. So the answer is to split that into two. And obviously, it's easy for me to say this because I've studied building training plans for many, many years, and it's much harder for a self-coached athlete to do this. But that's the basic way to approach it. We'll have a block of training focused on increasing your bike power, and then a block of training focused on increasing your endurance. So the athlete in question is now a coached athlete. And to address this directly to that person, because I know you asked this in our private coaching group the other day, all you need to do is follow the training plan. And it's common for an athlete to think, what else do I need to do on top of the training plan to continue to build power? The answer is nothing. You don't need to add anything else on. And actually adding things in is going to be counterproductive. So don't do extra bike sessions, don't do extra strength conditioning, don't do extra lifting in the gym. The things that are in your plan are designed to be balanced so that you have enough training stimulus to improve at the maximum possible rate, but not so much that you put yourself into a fatigue hole and can't recover by the next week. So obviously, it's a very difficult balancing act. But for you, the person who's asked this, just follow your plan. That is going to get you to the end of the FTP building block with a much bigger bike power. And then we'll move into the specific race preparation block. We'll extend your endurance. And you'll see then as you transition to doing more longer rides and more steady rides, you'll be doing them much faster than you expect to. And the current guys and girls that you're riding with are not going to be able to ride with you as comfortably anymore because you are going to be more powerful and stronger on the bike. But all you need to do is just follow your training plan. Right. Next up, question 3. I've noticed my long rides in my training plan are now planned by distance and not duration anymore. So again, this question comes from a coached team athlete. And in the past, I've always planned the long rides by duration. I've told athletes how many hours I want them to go out and ride. I've changed that for this season. And specifically just for my Ironman athletes, I've changed this so that in the final event specific preparation block, however long that is for each individual athlete, we're now doing that by distance and not duration. So an athlete is going to see a 90-kilometer ride this Sunday rather than, say, a 3-hour or a 4-hour ride that would have been in the plan. I'm sticking with doing it by duration for every other distance of athlete that we coach. For 70.3 Olympic sprints, that's staying by duration. But for the Ironman specific athletes, we really want to address this idea that we want an athlete going into Ironman race day knowing that they have ridden 180 kilometers more than once, have dealt with it comfortably. They know how fast they're going to ride that 180K. They know the power levels they're going to ride the 180K. And they're really confident they're going to have enough energy left to run a really good marathon off the back of it. And in the past, having planned this by duration, we occasionally came across some of the athletes who they would do their longest ride and they wouldn't complete the whole 180 kilometers during the training. And they had feelings of doubt going into the race that they wouldn't be able to do it. And it's one thing I want to address. My number one job as a coach is, if you like, it's making athletes doubt-free. That's it. It's going into a race and absolutely knowing that you're prepared and that you are going to be able to do this, not having any doubts going into it, knowing exactly what you're going to do on race day before you do it. That's the thing that I aim myself towards. I want athletes being really, really comfortable and confident that they're going to be able to complete it. And I really believe that changing the long ride to being duration, to being distance based, is going to be another step towards that. So we're refining our way of doing this over the years. We want all athletes on race day knowing that they've ridden 180K, ideally more than once, and knowing how fast and with how much power it's reasonable for them to be able to go and do this. Now, the flip of this is, again, another anecdote here. I did a membership call with an athlete the other day who told me a story that they'd been with another coach, and this coach had set them some targets for a ride they were going to go out on. And worse than not having confidence in it, the targets they'd been given by the coach they were working with at the time, they weren't realistic. And digging into the data a little bit, it turned out that the person they were working with didn't have the athlete do any baseline tests. So the athlete didn't know what their FTP was on the bike. They didn't know what the run paces should be. They didn't know what the swim paces should be. Everything was based on guesswork. And then worse, coming up to one of the key preparation B races, the coach said to this athlete, I expect you'll ride the bike leg of this in this amount of time. And the athlete said, quarter of the way through the ride, I realized I was going to be nowhere near the time that the coach had said. And I got really demoralized, and I just thought about even quitting just as I was going round. There was absolutely no point doing it because it was miles off. Then afterwards, when the athlete looked at the times other people had done, the winning person in their age group had gone pretty much the same time that the coach had said this athlete should have done. And they were miles out. And it led to this feeling in the athlete of total confusion as to what they should be aiming for, total demoralization that they were nowhere near the targets the coach had set them, and really being like not only not confident in what the coach has said to them, but really doubting everything that the coach said to them from that point, just questions in the mind the whole time. And that's one thing. If you're listening and you're working with a coach and you've got questions at the moment, I really encourage you to go to your coach and ask what these questions are and ask for an answer that satisfies you. Because you need to have that doubt-free phase in your mind. You need to understand what's going on and why. And a good coach will be able to tell you exactly why you're doing something and explain why you're not doing a different thing. So it's with my athletes, it's always totally fine to come with us with questions. And we're totally confident in the methodology of why we're going to answer a question the way we are, and we're going to explain it. Now, it's not to say that an athlete is always going to like the answer. And it's not to say that athletes are not sometimes going to decide, well, this coach's philosophy is not for me anymore, and decide to go somewhere else. That's totally understandable. But a coach should be able to explain to you why they have got you doing something and why and what the purpose of it is. And if you're in a situation where you've not been doing any regular testing, you don't know what your power levels are on the bike, you don't know what your run paces are or should be on the run, you don't know what your swim paces are or should be on the swim, there's big questions there. And if you go and ask your coach and you're not satisfied with the answer, I'd encourage you to have the courage to change if that's what you need. Because it's great to have a loyalty to somebody, but at the end of the day, you need to be working with someone who you've got faith in the way that they're working and why. And honestly, I see a lot of cowboys in this industry. There's a lot of people who are calling themselves triathlon coaches these days. They don't have very much background in it, or they certainly don't have a deep enough background to be able to explain the reason why they're doing something with an athlete. If you go to a coach and you ask them, why are you doing something? If you don't like the way things are going, have to sometimes have the courage to have the honest conversation and say, look, thanks very much for the help you've given me. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to try something else and make sure it works for me. And again, any good coach is going to understand and respect that you need to go and try a different way with a different person. So bear that in mind, please, everyone who's listening. Okay, next question. Really common one from an athlete. Can I ride longer than is planned on my long ride this weekend? So for our coached athletes, the overriding reason that we have rides the length that they are is they're sequential in a training plan, usually building across a block and then having a recovery week ahead of time. So we have a plan of steps forward and then a step backwards, and it's in there, and there's a methodology behind it to make you move forward in a sensible way. So you're going to get a little bit more tired each week, but not too overtired. But That being said, we recognize that athletes live in the real world and they don't live in a training plan, and that sometimes there's going to be a reason for you going out and doing a longer ride than the one is planned. And that's absolutely fine. So, our coached athletes are in a great position. Ask us, give us the reasons why. We'll have an honest conversation. And if it's appropriate, we'll say yes. And if not, we'll talk the reasons through and we'll come to an understanding together. But in general, what I would say is for athletes who have previously done much, much longer rides than they've currently got planned. Let's say last season you got to the point where your longest rides were 6 or 7 hours. And this season at the moment, your longest ride is 3 hours. And you want to go out with your mates and do a big 100-mile sportive. My answer is almost usually going to be yes, you can go and do that longer ride because our bodies maintain a much greater ability to ride for a long distance of time than we realize. If you've done it in a previous season and you're in reasonable bike shape, you're almost certainly going to be okay to do a much longer ride than you used to. Now, the caveats to this are newer riders and beginners and those who haven't done those really long rides before. I'd be really careful in stepping up your distance. Now, my plans usually have them going 30 minutes a week longer than the previous long ride. I'd be really careful going more than an extra hour longer than your previous long ride. I'm really happy with a 30-minute extension. Once we get above the 60-minute extension in duration, we're getting to the point where we just want to be careful that we're not going to overface you and either put you in a fatigue hole, put you at the risk of an overuse injury. It's usually the fatigue hole that's the thing we're most concerned about there, though. So for our coached athletes, always ask. We'll discuss the answer and get to one we're both happy with. If you're self-coached, those are my guidelines. 30 minutes more, usually very safe. We're getting towards 60 minutes. That's the maximum jump you want to go. So if you're at 3 hours and you want to do 6 hours, probably going to have to go 4 and 5 in between to be comfortable. You can go to 6. Okay, next question. My FTP test was a total failure because it was lower than it was last time. I started the test at the power I thought I could hold. Became obvious after 3 minutes I'd gone off too hard. Then the power dropped and it was just awful from this point on. And it was a total failure. And I'm really fed up with it. So this gives us a really good opportunity to talk through FTP tests and what their purpose is and what the information tells us at the end of it. This athlete in particular who asked the question, the context here is they are actually focusing on an ultra running event in the future. And so they've had a winter block that's included some bike training, and then they're moving into their specific race preparation block for the ultra. The FTP test was just a base level checking where are we at to make sure that the numbers are the right level. So it's baselining more than testing. And again, looking back through this athlete's data, they'd rightly prioritize the runs all the way through the training plan. If they were going to miss a session, they've missed the bike sessions. And so lo and behold, they've come to an FTP test. They've gone off too hard and it hasn't gone well. So the context here is the bike power levels and the FTP test is the least important part of this particular athlete's plan right now. So we can put it in context. It's not a total failure. We don't have to worry about it. And it's a different context for this athlete than it was for the majority of our athletes over here who are all training for triathlon, where the bike is the absolute key pinstone of what they're doing all the way through. It's a different thing for an athlete who's an ultra runner. We've got bike sessions in the plan to support their running, but that's what they're there for. So increasing FTP is not at all a focus of a winter block for an ultra runner. It's simply there to support their running. So again, it gives context to this idea that a test that doesn't improve is a failure. Well, it's not. Any test that you do that gives you an accurate number for where you're at right now is great because it means you're not going to be overtraining going forward into the future. And I'm going to reiterate this again. I say it almost in every podcast. I would much, much rather an athlete is training a little bit under their current power levels than a little bit over their current power levels. If you think of the training response curve, You're making as much progress on this side of the peak as you are over this side of the peak for much lower effort level. And honestly, in almost all situations, a 20-minute FTP test is going to slightly over-report what your actual real FTP is anyway. So that's the reason I set a cap at 100% of FTP for doing any kind of session. I don't want you doing 101, 104, 106% of FTP. I'd rather you sit at 98%, and then we can be sure you're getting the maximum bang for your training buck. Okay, next question. My heart rate variability gave me a yellow flag or a red flag on my testing day. What should I do? So, bit of context for athletes who are not coached by us. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is a way that you can measure every day whether your body is ready or not to absorb hard training that day. We use a separate app called HRV for training. It takes 1 minute to measure your HRV every morning, either using the camera on the back of your phone or using the sensor in a Garmin or an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or a Whoop strap. And you end up with a baseline of what your HRV reading is. And on days when HRV significantly changes and drops, the HRV for training app will give you a yellow flag saying back off the intensity today, or a red flag meaning take a rest day today. And HRV really informs all of the training that we do with our athletes. And the reason is there's no point doing hard training on a day when your body isn't ready to absorb it, because you're just wasting that hard training and you're just making yourself more fatigued. And honestly, I think in the long term, if you train hard at a time when your body is run down, the chances are you're going to be pushing yourself at least toward overtraining and at worst towards getting sick or ill. So the yellow light or the red light on an HRV testing app can be the warning to say, back off now before there's a bigger problem further down the line. So the context of what I've just said should give us the answer here. If you get a yellow or a red HRV on the day that you're planning to do a test, don't do the test that day. You take either a rest day or you do an easy recovery spin, and then you move that test session to later in the week and you get it done on a day when HRV is normal. To give us some guidelines here, most athletes will see maybe one red HRV flag in a 30-day period and maybe one yellow HRV flag in a 7-day period. So they don't happen very often. And when they do, it's only the hard sessions that we advise you to change the intensity of. You're totally fine to still do your longer endurance sessions, maybe just back the pace or the power off a little bit. But it's the really hard sessions where we've got to be really careful about training with a yellow. And with a red flag, you just take a rest day. So hopefully that gives us some ideas. If you get the yellow or the red on a test day, you don't do the test that day. You move it to later in the week. And again, athletes coached by us, just contact us. We'll have a chat about this and we'll work out where it goes best in the rest of your week to make sense. Next question. I've been reading a lot about the low carb diet and the health benefits of it. Should I be using it as a triathlete? Man, this is one of those can of worms questions. And honestly, there are as many people out there with as many opinions as there are people in the world. But here's my take, and here's the philosophy I put forward to our athletes. I don't believe that you can be a successful triathlete in the majority of cases and try and be working on a low carb diet. You need those carbohydrates as a source of fuel to be fueling your training and to be fueling your racing. And so you need to be taking those carbs in. Now, I know there are some people who have food allergies and some foods that they can't eat, but I personally am not an exponent of the low carb diet or the keto diet or however you want to describe it. We go much the other way, and people will have heard us talk and do podcasts with Precision Fuel and Hydration. You have the ability to absorb in the region of 60 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and that will fuel your exercise and allow you to go to a higher intensity. So why would you willingly choose to not use that fuel source and have to exercise at a lower intensity? As a long distance triathlete in particular, it's much more valuable for you to learn to utilize carbohydrate, to learn to digest it as you're moving, to learn to use it for ultimately being able to go faster on race day. But you're going to have to practice with it. And all the evidence from Precision Fuel and Hydration, when we spoke to them, said absorption of carbohydrate is trainable. And they've got loads of data on their website if you want to go and look of multiple years of studies they've done of athletes who've gradually increased the amount of grams of carbs per hour their athletes had taken and the corresponding improvements in their performance. So I'd encourage everyone to head over to the Precision Fuel and Hydration website. You can read the case studies that are on there. You can find athletes who are similar background to you and doing similar events to you. And there's tons of informative information on there. They're not prescriptive and they're not going to say you have to take our particular products. Although I'll say they've got some really well-designed products there, and I'd encourage you to look at things, especially like the Flow Gel. If you're doing an Ironman, that can be a game changer in terms of solving the problem of how you carry the calories on the bike. So head over to precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can use their fuel and hydration planning tool on the website, and that'll give you a personalized strategy for your training and for your race in terms of how many grams of carbs per hour you need, how many grams of electrolytes you need, and how much fluid you need in any given situation. You can then refine that in training, and that will help you perform at your best on race day. There's even actually the ability to book a one-to-one video consultation for free with our athlete support team, and they'll be happy to help you nail your race nutrition plan. So again, the links for that are in the show notes, either on YouTube or on the podcast, and you can just click through. And honestly, it's a great website because it's loads of educational stuff there for free. So just go and have a read. Okay. Next question. Should I do a 70.3 before doing an Ironman? And how far out before the Ironman should I do it? So my answer to this is, I think it's a really good idea to do a 70.3 in the lead up to an Ironman. About 5 or 6 weeks out before the Ironman works really well. The athletes on our training plans can have this built into the plan with a mini taper and mini recovery, but it gives you a chance to practice all of the things that you're going to do on race day. And it gives you a really good fitness boost sort of 5 or 6 weeks out from race day itself. And especially if you go and do one of the bigger 70.3s, you really get a feel for the sort of the size and the drama of the event that you're going to be facing on race day as an Ironman. So highly recommend people do it. You don't have to do one. Again, athletes on our plans, I build in a couple of race simulation weekends, and one of those is usually 5 or 6 weeks out from race day. We'll have you do that if you're not doing a 70.3. And if you are doing a 70.3, you don't do one of the race simulation weekends. So either way, the effect on your fitness is going to be similar for our athletes. But I would really encourage you to go and do that 70.3 in terms of a race preparation event for an Ironman. Now, I don't recommend it's an Olympic, and I don't recommend it's a sprint distance that far out, because it's a different energy demand. You have to go much harder on a sprint or an Olympic. You'll end up being much more sore later in the week and probably more tired, bizarrely, even though, it's a shorter distance. You're relatively going harder, and it's the intensity that's harder to recover from. So I'd advise going with the 70.3 and 5 weeks or 6 weeks out from your ideal race day. Next question. My Garmin's telling me I have a high aerobic shortage. What should I do? Now, the advice that Garmin watches are giving out to people these days is becoming the bane of my existence. And so this is personally to my athletes that I coach. Ignore the advice that Garmin is giving you. And the reason I can say that is we've got our race ready system. I pull all of your data out of Training Peaks at the end of the week. I compare what you did with what you were asked to do. Our algorithms put things together and create a score that both you and I can understand, that shows us how your fitness is progressing. And most importantly, it models how your fitness is going to progress in the future if you keep on training like you're doing at the moment with the same sort of level of commitment you've got. And that will give us a really good guide to how we can expect your race to go. We don't need Garmin's advice. We don't need it telling you things like you've got the fitness of a 20-year-old or randomly telling you that your fitness is decreasing. I don't even know if this is possible, but if it is, I'd advise turning those alerts off on a Garmin. Okay. And I'm sorry if there's anyone from Garmin listening and you don't like that, but my advice is it is not helping anybody. It's just putting doubts in people's minds. So ignore it. Our coached athletes, go to your race ready section in the website, check out your report every week. see how it's predicting your fitness is going to increase towards race day. And again, it's based on very simple but accurate data. How much of this have you done at the correct intensity and the correct duration, and what's likely to happen in the future if you keep on doing what you've done in the past? So the past, what you've already done, is a really good indicator of what you're going to do in the future as well. So if you're looking into the future prediction and you don't like what you see in terms of your fitness prediction for race day, the answer is simple. We need to start dedicating a little bit more time to the training now to help that number be projected to where you want it to be for race day. And if things are looking great, fantastic. Take it as a pat on the back and take it as things are on track, and just keep doing what you're doing. The last question is, how do I determine my maximum heart rate? This was sent in by a listener via email. And so my advice on this one is, I don't need my athletes to have a maximum heart rate reading. I don't think it's something that's particularly advisable certainly for older athletes to be doing, to push yourself to the absolute maximum. All the tests that we do in terms of FTP tests, run tests, swim tests, will give us heart rate data that we can use to set zones from, but they're not maximal tests. We don't want our athletes pushing themselves to the very, very top level. The first thing is, especially if you're relatively new to endurance training and you try to do a max heart rate test, it can be really dangerous if you've not done much exercise recently, for sure. And also, it doesn't really tell us anything. Your maximum heart rate doesn't tell us what you can do for 20 minutes or 60 minutes. A much better test is to do a 20-minute test and set your zones based off that, because although it's hard but achievable, and you're not pushing your heart to the very, very highest levels that you need to do to get a max heart rate test. Okay, then. That brings us to the end of this week's episode. So here are some discount codes and deals for you. Over at precisionfuelandhydration.com, use the code Oxygen24 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And over at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive triathlon coaching program for busy age groupers. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today and the advice has helped you out, well, great stuff. I hope that's helped put some of your fears at rest. And I know from some of the calls we've had, it's helping raise the right questions in the minds of people as to whether their current coaching relationship is working for them. If you're looking for a change, or if you're looking for high quality, proven coaching for Ironman or 70.3 triathlon this year, you can just check out the details of our coaching packages on our website at teamoxygenaddict.com. And then if you're interested, there's a link in the show notes below. You can join our waiting list and you'll be notified if a slot becomes available. And at that point, you'll have a chance to book a call with us and see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team. So although we don't have slots available at the moment, we'll make those call appointments available to people as and when we do have athletes who end their coaching packages during the season, if and when that happens. So remember, there's links in the show notes, so you don't have to remember them. Till next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast. See ya.